Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. We have had such a treat this Shabbos of learning with Professor Berk last night, and again this morning during services, and I'm very much looking forward to this continued conversation, especially as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors myself, to hearing this particular lecture. Very much looking forward to it. We are so grateful and continue to be grateful to Beverly Baker and to the Beverly and Morris Baker Foundation in memory of Morris and Baker. May he always be remembered for a blessing. So thank you very much once again for this incredible opportunity, Beverly, allowing us to learn and grow with such amazing scholars and speakers. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Stephen Berk.
Thank you very much, and again, Shabbat Shalom. Now, I've been teaching so long, I have a very, very thick skin. This is a historical rock that we're going to go through now, and if it tires you out or you get bored, if you want to, I'll use the old language, if you want to hop a drink, it's all right. If you want to take a snooze, it's all right. I've seen everything, I've heard everything. When you teach students for 49 years, nothing comes as a surprise. So, let me begin. It is 70 years since the end of the Second World War. A little over 70 years since Auschwitz was liberated. Auschwitz was liberated on January 27th of 1945. That, incidentally, is the European Yom HaShoah, January 27th. We commemorate around the time of the Warsaw Ghetto. Europeans commemorated around the time of the liberation of Auschwitz. Now, 70 years gives us a sense of perspective. We know things that we didn't know before, and some of the things that we knew before have been reinforced. So let me begin. Now, I don't mean to offend anyone here, but the fact of the matter is going to be that, and again, this is not new, certainly to Jews, but if there are any non-Jews here, I do not mean to offend. 1900 years of Christian teachings about the Jews are going to poison the atmosphere, the environment in Europe. It is not, let us say, exterminationist, but it is something that leads in the direction of extermination. The sad fact of life is, these are the basic teachings of contempt. Teaching number one, Judaism at the time of the appearance of Jesus was spiritually bankrupt. The Jews worshipped the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. If you were my students, and they come as a surprise to you, we in the Jewish community lament the fact that our youngsters know absolutely nothing. All those years of Hebrew school, all those years of day school, one is astonished to see how little they know. It is small comfort, but it may be comforting to you, and to me actually. Nobody knows anything. The fact of the matter is, I find myself in the awkward situation sometimes, because it is relevant in some classes. I have to talk to the Catholic students about the basic doctrines of the Catechism. The students know, even again, with all the Sunday school, with all of the communions and all of that thing, they just don't understand. So at this time, you should be lucky that you're really not my students, because at this time I would walk amongst the students, and I would turn to one of them. All those years of teaching have taught me one thing. They don't teach us in any education courses and no pedagogical institutes. Let me tell you on the basis of experience, it's nothing like a little bit of intimidation to get a 20-point rise in the IQ. It doesn't last more than 20 seconds. But you can get a lot. In 20 seconds, you can get a lot. So if these were my students, I'd say, what story in the New Testament testifies or shows you that Christian teaching talks about the Jews worshiping the letter of the law and the spirit of the law? And the answer is Jesus, the story in the New Testament, Jesus chasing the money changers out of the temple. The point of the story is look at the Jews turning a buck right really to the Holy of Holies. In reality, there has to be people who are changing money, because remember the temple was used for sacrifices. People from all over the diaspora are coming. They have to exchange the money from whence they come to buy animals, to the currency of Palestine, or Judea as it was called at the time, and have to buy animals to offer sacrifices. But again, everything is in perception. Teaching number 2 is the most significant of them all, and that is the Jews are guilty of the greatest crime that's ever been perpetrated on this planet. Homicide is murder. Again, terrible crime. Parricide, the killing of a parent, is worse than that. Regicide, the killing of a king, is worse than that. We are guilty of the greatest crime that has ever taken place in the history of humanity. We are guilty of deicide. We killed God's only son. Again, everything is in perception. But I must tell you that Mel Gibson had it right. He is not a nice man, for sure, but I struggled through. I actually went to see that film, The Passion. It is the bloodiest film I have ever seen, but he had it right in terms of really depicting the way it is described excuse me, in the New Testament. There is, again, and you should be familiar with this. I know where I am and I know to whom I'm speaking, but I'm telling you, if you want to understand anti-Semitism, all you have to read is chapter 27 of the book of Matthew in the New Testament. There's Pilate, Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. He's interrogating Jesus. He turns to the crowd and says, in effect, I'm almost verbatim, what do you want from me? Or what do you want from him? He's done nothing wrong. What should I do with him? And the Jewish crowd yells out, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate yells out, why? What has he done? And then in one of the most famous gestures in all of history, Pilate takes a flask of water and washes his hands. I wash my hands of this. What do you want me to do with him? Crucify him. Crucify him. And Pilate sends Jesus out to be flagellated and crucified. And so no one will mistake the point of the story. In the book of Matthew, repeated again, somewhat differently in the Gospel of John, the Jewish crowd yells out as Jesus is being taken away to be flagellated and crucified. The Jewish crowd yells out, may his blood be upon us and our children. There's nothing subtle here. You can argue, again, today Christian as well as Jewish scholars, most of them at least, speak about it couldn't have been that way. Couldn't have been that way. No Roman governor, no Roman procurator is ever going to turn to the people in a conquered province like Judea was a conquered province and say, you decide who lives and who dies. Had we had more time, we would talk about why this is taking place. In effect, to make a short story really right to the point, a long story right to the point, it is the new religion, Christianity, is competing with Jews for confidence. Who has the truth? That is, does the new Christian faith have the truth? Is Paul right when he says with the coming of the Torah, with the coming of Jesus, the mitzvot of the Torah no longer binding? Here's something that you can take away with the trivial pursuit. If you have Christian friends, what do they eat on Easter? On Easter Sunday, the tradition is you eat a ham. You know why you eat a ham? Because it demonstrates that you are free from the yoke of the Torah. That the Torah no longer gives salvation, that the only thing that gives salvation is belief that Jesus died on the cross and saved humanity from sin. That's, many Christians don't understand the origins of that, but that's where it comes from. So, the competition between the two groups, and that may play a role in the venom that is expressed in the New Testament. It's also, as we all know, very, very sad. I make no confession here. We know that family fights sometimes are the most vicious of them all. The first Christians are Hebrew Christians. They go to the synagogue on Saturday, they observe kashrut, they put on tefillin. The only difference is that they accept Jesus as the Messiah, and some of them accept Jesus as the Son of God. There's going to be a bitter in-house, in-family battle between traditional Jews and the new Christians, or the Hebrew Christians as they were called at the time. Now, when you get a fight in the family, it can be very, very brutal. Be that as it may, the last teaching of contempt, very, very important, is the teaching of the church that there's a new Israel. A new Israel. That is, the Jews were abandoned by God. The covenant has been abrogated because God is so angry with the Jewish people, because they killed his only son, who was one of them, and therefore God is withdrawn. He has dissolved the covenant. The new Israel is the Christian church. The new Torah is the New Testament. These ideas will penetrate through Europe, and of course what's going to happen is, we know this from our own country's history. If you have a people that is held in contempt, that legally is discriminated against for a long period of time, a folklore develops about this people. And so look what we have done to African Americans. We, again, discriminated against them, we piled on legal discrimination, and what does the folklore say? The folklore says that every black man, every black boy wants to have sexual intercourse with a white woman and white girl. We believe that, or the country believed for a long period of time, that black people were intellectually and morally inferior. Absolute nonsense. That their sexual organs were different than white sexual organs. It's all nonsense. But again, when a people is held down in contempt, and a people really is going to suffer legal discrimination, this is going to have really an enormous impact. That's what happened to us. Again, Christian teachings about the Jews, the legal discrimination, why should anyone be surprised that beginning in the 12th century in England, one begins to hear rumors and people will die. Thousands of Jews will die as a consequence of this. And the rumor is going to be that when no one is looking, the rabbis, the Balabatim from the community, from the Jewish community, they kill Christian boys and girls, take the blood from their bodies, and use them for the baking of the unleavened bread, the matzah. That's called ritual murder. That's what it's called. Thousands of Jews will die as a consequence of this. The second charge aimed at our people, again, leading to the deaths and the expulsion of thousands, if not tens of thousands, is what is called host desecration. In the Catholic Church, the English translation of the Latin is transubstantiation. At the communion, when a priest says a prayer over the wafer does not symbolize the body of Christ, it becomes the body of Christ. And when the priest says a prayer over the wine, it becomes his blood. And so the charge is going to be made in the medieval period, again, when no one is looking. The rabbis and the Balabatim, they go into a church, they take the consecrated hosts, and they stab them. And the charge is that the Jews are reenacting the crucifixion of Jesus, and more than one Catholic theologian will testify that he saw when the Jews did this, that blood came out of the wafer. These are the things, again, the popular teachings, and then, of course, the popular folklore. All of this is going to play a role. And today we believe it is important. Although, for the most part, the Catholic Church, at least, there is no pope who has ever approved the murder of Jews. Put them in ghettos, make them wear distinctive insignia, but never to kill them. That's the doctrine of St. Augustine. That is, the Jews are a despicable people for all of the reasons that I spoke about, but you cannot kill the Jews. You can put them in ghettos, although he doesn't use that term, but you can isolate them, but you cannot kill them. One of the interesting reasons that St. Augustine and subsequent Catholic leaders advocated in terms of preserving the Jews alive, we need the holy books of the Jews. Now that's an interesting thing. Why do you need the holy books of the Jews? Because Christian teaching says that in what they call the Old Testament, what we call the Hebrew Scriptures, you can see, the coming. You can see talk about the coming of Jesus. Now the most popular element of that is what the prophet Isaiah. When Isaiah says, an Alma, a woman will come, and from her will come a Mashiach, will come a Messiah. We interpret that an Alma as a young woman. When that were the book, that is, when our scriptures are translated into Greek, the English translation of the Greek is, she's not a young woman, she's a virgin. There are other things. The book of Genesis, when Abraham is visited, remember, by the three strangers, Catholic theologians say that's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And when Moses is told to part the sea of reeds, stretch out his hand, some Catholic theologians say that's the first sign of the cross. Again, all I'm trying to say to you here is there's a limit beyond which the Roman Catholic Church and other Christian churches will not go. That's an interesting idea when you think of it, more than you ever wanted in this lecture, but I'm going to start, so I've got to give it to you. And that is this. It is often said, particularly by secular people, that religion is an abomination, that millions of people, or lots of people, have been killed in the name of religion. That is a correct statement. But if you know your modern history, it's the secular ideologies, Nazism, fascism, and communism, that really are responsible for the deaths of many, many more people that were ever killed in the name of religion. I've been to China, I've done trips to China 3 times. I can tell you that Chinese scholars are reluctant to say it publicly, but they all know it. That is, in Mao Zedong's great leap forward in the 1950s, The maximum figure that we give for the dead is 80 million dead. The minimum figure is about 40 million. So don't be so quick to jump on the anti-religious bandwagon. It is secular ideologies that are probably even more destructive. So what do we have? That's what we come into the early modern period. And then, of course, how do our people survive historically? They do the things that Christians either cannot do or will not do. Jews survive by fitting into the nooks and crannies of an economy. And in the early medieval period, the early modern period, one of the nooks and crannies is the lending of money at interest. You don't have to be an economic wizard to know interest rates are a function of risk. The greater the risk, the greater the interest rate. It is very risky to lend money in the medieval and the early modern period. Interest rates will run from a minimum of 12% per annum to 180% per annum. And again, you don't have to be an economic wizard to figure out if you're paying the rate of 100% interest, it is unlikely that you will ever be able to pay it back. And you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure out that those who borrow money from the Jews and are unable to pay it back are not filled with love and admiration for the Jews. The other business, of course, is an interesting one. We don't associate with it. Take it from me, historically, particularly in Eastern Europe, where most of the Jews live, there is a Jewish occupation that is as Jewish as kreplach and chicken soup, and that is the sale of alcohol. Jews and alcohol go hand in hand in Eastern Europe. In the Pale of Settlement, where 95% of the Jews live, but where there are only 14% of the general population, 96%, somewhere around that, of all inns and saloons in the Pale of Settlement were owned by Jews, which meant the landlords who leased the land to the Jews, the distilleries and the saloons, the government which got its taxes from the sale of vodka, and the Jews who made a living from the sale of alcohol, all had a vested interest in the perpetual inebriation of Russian and Polish peasants. Again, nothing to ingratiate the Jews with the indigenous population. These are the things, and also the envy. Jews do very, very well. At least some Jews do very well as we move from one economic phase to another. When Europe moves from feudalism to capitalism, the Jews are being, at least some Jews, got to be careful here. Some Jews are going to benefit enormously. We bring to the table some very, very important assets. One, again, do you realize how unique we American Jews are? We're unique in a number of ways. We are probably, you may not think about this, but it is true. I will tell you. The fact of the matter, again, is we are the only large Jewish community in the history of the Jewish people that is essentially monolingual. The overwhelming majority of American Jews speak only English. In Eastern Europe, if your families came from Eastern Europe, depending on where they were, if they came, for example, from Galicia, a Galiciana family, they spoke Yiddish, they probably spoke Polish, and if it was in the eastern part of Galicia, they spoke Ukrainian. And if they came from a fairly well-to-do family, they also spoke German. Now, if they were Litvak, if you're a Litvak family, very few Jews spoke Lithuanian. They spoke Yiddish, they spoke a good Hebrew. Litvaks usually spoke a good Hebrew, particularly those who came in the 20th century. And of course, they spoke Russian. And if they came again from a well-to-do family, they spoke German as well. That's an enormous advantage. Literacy is it's a premium. And the ability to be bilingual, trilingual, or quadrilingual gives you an enormous advantage. Also, because they were prohibited from owning land, Jews, again, lent money of interest. They became peddlers, they became storekeepers, they accumulated capital and expertise in capital. All of this will benefit the Jews, and the problem is going to be is that when Europe changes from feudalism to capitalism, to industrial capitalism to financial capitalism, some Jews will do exceptionally well, and some people in the general population are hit very, very hard. Look at this. Look at this statement. Before the Industrial Revolution, where would I go? I would go to a carpenter. That's where I would go. The clothing that the men are wearing here, you would go to a tailor. If you're a woman, you went to a seamstress to make a dress for you. Comes the Industrial Revolution, what's going to happen? Tables like this are made by the tens of thousands. They're made in factories. No more tailors. You buy it in a department store. You buy it in a clothing store. The result is those people who work with their hands, the so-called artisanal elements in society, they are going to have a very serious problem. And they see lots of wealthy Jews, or what they think are lots of wealthy Jews. They identify their misfortunes with the Jews. Some of this plays out, again, every analogy is a reach, and I'm going to give you one that's a reach. You go into small towns, even in my shtetl here, that is in Schenectady, which is not that small, it's a city of 60,000. You know what everybody talks about? You know what they don't want? Don't bring Walmart in. Now, we're not going to get into a discussion of Walmart, but the fact of the matter is Walmart or any other supermarket chain. Again, how many, I can't speak about Detroit, but I suspect there are not too many family-owned pharmacies floating around Detroit. There are virtually none in the city of Schenectady. You can buy drugs in Walmart. You can buy pharmaceuticals in Walmart. You can buy shoes in Walmart. I'm not blaming Walmart, I'm saying that's the way of the world. And middle-class people, shop owners, are going to find themselves in a difficult position. You know what the great Jewish contribution in Germanic Europe and in Great Britain and in our own country is from the second half of the 19th century? Well, these two brothers, the Katz brothers, they roam around the Berkshires, that's near me, a beautiful part of western Massachusetts. They're peddlers. They make a lot of money. And they say, you know what, we're in Massachusetts. We got to go to Boston. They change their name. Katz becomes Philemon. That's the Philemon department stores. The Jewish contribution to economic history in the second half of the 19th century, the early part of the 20th century, is the department store. The department stores are wonderful. It's no coincidence. Saks, Gimbels, Macy's, Sears Roebuck, all Jewish owned. All the Federated stores, the Lazarus family, all Jewish owned. They've made employment for lots of people, but again, if you're a small shopkeeper, you've got a problem. And that's what's going to happen in Germany. So the envy, the displacement of large numbers of people, it's not the Jews who are primarily responsible, not that many in number, but again, it will play a role. And then it's summed up best by the rabbi, the chief rabbi of Moscow. He's saying this as early as 1912. It's a very famous statement. The Trotskys play the tune, and the Bronsteins pay the piper. Trotsky's real name is Bronstein. When Trotsky is asked in the 1920s, what are you, Comrade Trotsky? You know what answer he is? I'm a Marxist-Leninist, I'm a proletarian internationalist. Who do you think he was kidding? In the eyes of all of those who hated communism, he's a Zhid, he's a Kaiser. The alleged linkage of Jews with communism is also going to play a role in anti-Semitism. And then, of course, you remember your high school history or college history, you know about social Darwinism. That is, Darwin's ideas, which he never meant to be applied to human beings, will be applied to human beings. Darwin spoke about inferior species and superior species. The inferior species die off, the superior species survive. And so what do you get? The social Darwinists say if there are inferior species among animals, and we're the highest form of animal life, there must be superior species and inferior species among human beings. And the social Darwinists identified it with race. The whites were superior to the blacks, whites were superior to people of color. This was a pervasive idea. If you were all my students at Union in the year 1900, and I asked you, no matter how liberal you are, how many of you people believe that whites are superior to people of color? Let me tell you that if there are 100 students in the class, at least 99 would raise their hands and believe that whites were superior. There's nothing inherent in social Darwinism to be anti-Semitic. But some anti-Semites will draw the conclusion. That is, inferior races, superior races, the Jews are an inferior race, a wicked race, it's race against race, and the Jews must be destroyed. These are the old things that we knew, and most of them still stand up with the passage of time. Here's the new stuff, and that has to do with our belief now for sure in the centrality of World War I in the coming of the Holocaust. World War I is a traumatic event for Germany. It's the first of a series of traumas that afflict the German people. Now again, I move to the side and tell you, you are hard-pressed to argue from a historical point of view, before the First World War, you're hard-pressed to argue that if a terrible thing happened to the Jews, if a Holocaust was going to happen, that it would come out of Germany. Here's an accurate historical anecdote. A group of elderly German Jewish men are sitting around a table having coffee at a cafe in Berlin. And one of the older Jews gets up and says, I had this terrible dream last night. And the dream is, I saw Jewish children and infants being dropped into a fire. And the other man said, what kind of crazy dream is this? What are you talking about? And then one of the guys says, not even that French scum would do anything like that. Now, again, you're lucky not my students, because I then walked out and asked, why would anybody say that if a bad thing was going to happen to the Jews, it would come out of France? Because we want to finish before Shavuos, I'll give you the answer. And the answer is because of the Dreyfus affair. When hundreds of thousands of French men and women went out into the streets, screaming for the heads of the Jews. We are hard-pressed. Russia is a more anti-Semitic place. Romania is the most anti-Semitic place historically in all of Europe. So if you're hard-pressed to argue that it would come out of Germany. To be sure, German anti-Semitism is not an oxymoron. There's no question. It goes back a long time. But it's the war that changes absolutely everything. The Germans expect to win that war. And by 1916, it's a stalemate within Germany. And people are going to ask, why is there a stalemate? The anti-Semites come out of the woodwork. The Jews are stabbing us in the back. The Jews are not serving at the front. The Jews are playing around with our women and girls. The Jews are making a lot of money out of the war. It gets so bad that the German army is forced to conduct what is called a union census. They want to find out how many Jews are actually serving in the German army. They will conduct the census. The census will not be revealed. Probably by the end of the war, it is maybe usually, they say, the evidence seems to be that it was produced after the end of the war. The census reveals something astonishing thing. There were 513,000 Jews living in Germany. That's all, out of 65 million Germans. Out of the 513,000 Jews who lived in Germany, 80,000 served at the front. That was a higher percentage than for Germany at large. And out of the 80,000 Jews who served at the front, 12,000 were killed. That's a higher mortality rate than was for German society at large. But the German people will not notice. The anti-Semites come out of the woodwork, and they play upon all of those things that I spoke about. 1918, crucial year in world history and in Jewish history. The German army collapses at the front. Germany is beaten on the field of battle. Why is it beaten on the field of battle? Because beginning in March of 1918, 300,000 American soldiers arrive each month. What does this mean? It's not American industrial capacity that wins the war. We bring fresh blood and fresh meat. The Germans use the British expression of shot their bolt. But simultaneously, there are revolts in the German rear by socialists, by new communists, by trade union people. A number of them are Jews. And so the rumor spreads, this is the real stab in the back legend. Our gallant soldiers would have won the First World War if they were not stabbed in the back by the socialists, the communists, the Masons, the trade union people, and the Jews. And remember, World War I ends very, very differently. This is the 100th anniversary of World War I. I'll just juxtapose this. Some of you may have served in the Second World War. Some of you may have studied the Second World War. When World War II was over, every German town and city is reduced to rubble. Every inch of German territory is occupied by Allied soldiers. Even the dumbest German knows that Germany has lost the war. It rolls off like a litany. When does World War I come to an end? The 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. When the German army surrenders, the German army is deep in France and is in occupation in nearly all of Belgium. The German people have been told one last push by our gallant soldiers and the war is over. There's light at the end of the tunnel. The war is over, and many Germans, including the young Adolf Hitler, do not understand how their country lost the war and believe that the country was stabbed in the back. So World War I is very important. So too is the role of personality. Hitler is really very, very important here. He's not just a catalyst, as some historians have suggested. This is a man that has a particular, the German expression, Weltanschauung, a particular worldview. Timothy Snyder wrote a very interesting article in the New York Review of Books, and it's been said by other people as well. He says it better than most. For Hitler, it's the crudest form of social Darwinism. It's race against race. That's how you survive. That's what Lebensraum, living space, is all about. We've got to grab as much territory as we can. Those races that are not tough and brutal and ruthless, they're going to die. And the ultimate anti-race is the Jew. Because the Jew doesn't understand this. The Jew speaks about universal ethics. The Jews speak about all men are brothers and sisters. All men and women are brothers and sisters. After all, isn't that what the story of Adam and Eve is all about? If Adam's the first man, Eve is the first woman, we are all descended. No one can say that he or she is better than anybody else. You've heard that ad nauseum from rabbis. That's a problem for him. Not that he's read the Old Testament, not that he's read the Hebrew Scriptures. He doesn't like Jewish universalism. And he, in fact, argues the principle. After all, the Nazis have a serious problem. Germany is essentially a Christian country, Catholic and Lutheran. What do you do? What do you do with Jesus? I mean, I think I may have said this to some of you. I'm leading a trip to Poland, and there I am, cars driving along there. The bus, I'm sitting up front with the bus driver, we're talking about religion. He's a Catholic, I'm a Jew. And I tell him, Jesus was a Jew. He stops the bus. You see, he doesn't believe it. Doesn't believe it. That's it. Christians, or the Nazis have to create an Aryan Jesus. If you have Christian friends, and you go into their homes and they have a picture of Jesus on the wall, he looks like one of the Three Musketeers. Right? Long blonde hair, beautiful trimmed beard, blue eyes, that's an Aryan Jesus. And the Nazis, of course, even go further than that. They deny his Jewishness. They say that Jesus and his family are descended from a group of Aryans that migrated from Central Europe, from Germanic Europe to Palestine, really about 2 centuries before his birth. So what I'm trying to tell you here is, we've got a problem here. And the Nazis, again, are going to have a problem. But for the Nazis, and for Hitler in particular, the fact of the matter is the Jews are the anti-race. They must be eliminated. And the Nazis will buy into a German slogan. It's from the 1870s, long before Hitler was even conceived. You saw that slogan, if you ever seen newsreels in Nazi party rallies, that slogan is always there. Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. Again, that's hammered into the German people. The Jews are our misfortune. I'm coming close to saying to you, and I do believe this, many historians will agree, some will disagree. No Hitler, no Nazi accession to power. No Hitler, no Second World War. No Hitler, no Holocaust. Never minimize the role of personality in history. And in addition to that, there's something else that we have learned. Historians are like lawyers. We like a paper trail. We want to see the paper. We would give our collective left arms for a Hitler Befehl, a specific order from Hitler calling for the extermination of Jews. It does not exist. What we have is Hitler's conversations, table talk conversations with a number of people. And what we see, it was said as early as 1938, when a leading Nazi said, sometimes it is necessary to march towards our Fuhrer. We know what he wants. He's laid out for us. Now we must march towards him. We must fulfill his aspirations. That's the problem that the Jews confront. There's a competition among various branches of the Third Reich, each one trying to curry favor with Hitler and leading Nazis. And how do you do it? By really sucking it to the Jews. And even within each organization, there will be a ferocious competition in order to outdo the other in murdering the Jews. That is a recipe for absolute disaster. And then when it comes here, we now know more about, everybody worries about, why didn't the Jews do more? Why didn't they resist more? I'll talk to you about that in a few moments. The fact of the matter is, the Holocaust is as much a chapter in the history of the non-Jews as it is in the Jews. I mean, after all, forgive me for saying this, it is not easy to cut out the eyes of Jewish children, to slice off the nipples of Jewish women, to pile up the dead. To put thousands of people in gas chambers and then cremate them. Not easy to do this. You really got to be believers in this. And there's no question. This is what we know. Nazi ideology penetrated into the hearts and minds of large numbers of ordinary Germans. The two books that deal with this best, although they come to different interpretations, are Goldhagen's Hitler's Willing Executioners and Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men. They both draw upon a particular group of men. This is Battalion 101. They're German policemen in Hamburg. They're responding to an advertisement in one of the German newspapers that the Third Reich needs policemen in Poland. These are not the sharpest tools in the shed, and very few of them are Nazi Party members. But they're smart enough to know better to serve as a policeman in German-occupied Poland than to get your bullions shot off on the Eastern Front. They think they're going to be traffic cops. They think they're going to investigate crimes. They go to Poland, they get training, and all of a sudden, they assemble for a morning rally. Listen to what happens. The commandant comes out. He's crying. The commandant is actually crying. And he tells the men, I've been up all night. I got this terrible, terrible order. So terrible that I stayed up all night to get confirmation. Finally, I got the confirmation. The order is we have to go to the nearby town, Polish town of Yosevo. There are 1,800 Jewish men, women, and children there. We're going to kill all of them. And then he says, this we did not know. He turns to the people, the men in his battalion 101, and says, this is a terrible order. I know many of you are fathers. If there's anybody here who thinks that he cannot fulfill this order, step out of the line, there will be no punishment whatsoever. And a number of men step out of the line, and they are not punished. We had no idea that something like that could take place. No idea whatsoever. Well, those who stay, most of the men stay, and they do. They do what they have to do. Ultimately, they're responsible for the death of 90,000 Jews. And those who study it say, again, what's the key factor here? Goldhagen says ideology, and Browning says ideology is important, but there are other things. Peer pressure, for example. Careerism. You step out of the line, you're not going to be punished. But remember, the Germans assume they're going to win the war. And when the war is won, there are going to be promotions, and you move back into civilian life. You don't want it on your record that when you were asked to do a difficult job, you said no. So peer pressure is important. Again, careerism. I line up with Goldhagen. I think ideology is most important. And you know where you see it? In Battalion 101, there's a physician. His job is to take care of the physical needs of the soldiers, the physical problems, and their mental problems. Lots of alcoholism in these killing battalions. He's got to somehow provide some rationale for them. He's got to take care of their psychological needs. But he has one other function. His function is to show a German soldier, Battalion 101, that when they approach the Jews, and a Jewish woman is holding a child to her breast, show the soldier, his job is to show the soldier where he should shoot the woman or the child so the bullet goes simultaneously through both of them, economizing on ammunition, but also making it easier on the German soldier. He doesn't have to kill, he can kill two at one time rather than one at a time. Well, the interrogators asked him after the war. Listen to the answer he gives. The interrogator says, you're a physician. You're trained to save lives. How could you do such a thing? And he says, I did exactly what I was trained to do. Now, I know my limitations. I'm not a physician. But my physician friends tell me that, when we discuss this, they say he's absolutely right in terms of the medicine. That is, he goes on to say, this physician, Nazi physician, he says, I did exactly what I was trained to do. What was I trained to do in medical school? If a soldier is wounded in an arm or a limb, and you cannot treat the infection, you amputate the limb in order to save the body. Second sentence. The Jews are the gangrene of society. They had to be eliminated. That's ideology. That's the power. Ideas are important. And not all the ideas that are important in history are good and benevolent ideas. Some of them are absolutely tragic, pernicious, and absolutely evil. So the result here is going to be ideology is important. We know much more about German behavior than we ever knew before. And then it comes to the question of Jewish responses. Wrong. I'll give you an expression. It was not said by Poles. It was not said by Germans. Later it would be. But the man who coins the expression is one of our heroes of the Holocaust. This is the man that gives us the basic documentation of life in the Warsaw Ghetto. That's Emanuel Ringelblum. If you've been to Warsaw, you know all about Ringelblum. Ringelblum forms a secret organization called the Oneg Shabbat. That's an organization, doctors are in it, lawyers are in it, nurses are in it, teachers are in it, social workers. They have one job. They have to chronicle the ghetto. They're to write papers about the ghetto. So people will, the papers are buried in milk cans. We recovered about 2 or 3 of the milk cans. We know that other milk cans somehow were destroyed and lost during the war. That's how we know, for example, about the physical problems. Again, what I'm about to tell you, again, it's nasty, all of this stuff. And it is Shabbat, but this is what we have to talk about. For example, the physicians tell us, always a telltale sign of a community in distress. Young women cease to menstruate. Whenever you have that, you know the community is up against the wall. People are dying from all sorts of diseases. There's studies of starvation. And the ultimate testimony that the people in the Warsaw Ghetto are up against the wall, it doesn't happen often. The literature doesn't record it happening often, but if the literature says there are 3 or 4 cases, you can bet your last shekel that there must have been many more. That is, there are instances of cannibalism in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Jews are really eating their own. Small wonder. The average caloric ratio in the Warsaw Ghetto is 158 calories per day. Now, I mention all of this to you because the expression that Ringelblum says, quote, they went like sheep to the slaughter. Well, some of them do. There's no question about this. But when one looks at the obstacles to resistance, you're astonished that there is any resistance whatsoever. If you have a caloric ratio of approximately 150 calories a day, you are talking about people that have neither the spiritual or the physical wherewithal to launch your rebellion. In addition to that, I'll avoid, to use the old language, I'll avoid that the Nazis were as stupid as they get depicted on American television. You can make a case, only in our country could you have a film like Hogan's Heroes appear on television. The Nazis are looked upon as buffoons. Unfortunately for us, they were not buffoons. If we had more time, the German war effort, let me tell you, is a really bad war effort. German soldiers are very brave, German generals are very good, Hitler's a lousy war leader. But the fact of the matter is, again, when it came to murdering the Jews, this was probably the most efficient aspect of the war effort of the Third Reich. So the Germans are not stupid. They practice a policy of collective responsibility. You strike a German soldier, everybody in the town gets killed. That's going to dampen down resistance. In addition to that, the Nazis practiced very effective duplicity. Treblinka, for example. The trains roll into Treblinka. You know what the Jews see? They look at the slats of the train. They see a clock. They see directions. Chelm this way, Lublin this way, Warsaw that way. There's a ticket counter over there. Nazi duplicity is very, very effective in understanding the Holocaust. One ought not to sell the Nazis short on that way. When the 55,000 Jews of Salonika, that's the pearl of the Sephardic diaspora in Greece, that's the largest Sephardic Jewish community in Europe. In April of 1943, they're put on trains, they will all be dead within 96 hours. Nearly all of them will be dead within 96 hours. As the Jews go onto the train, the male heads of families are given deeds to land in the Ukraine. They're told they're going to be turned into farmers. This is very effective stuff that we're talking about. And it's going to play a role here. And then we come to one of the most controversial issues of the Holocaust. Time is running out, so I will be very, very quick. It is, Lucy Davidovich was right. The war against the Jews was a pan-European phenomenon. There was no country in Europe, not a single exception, and I'm including Denmark and I'm including Bulgaria. There wasn't a single country in Europe that did not have indigenous anti-Semites that were actually delighted with what was happening to the Jews. And the Nazis are going to receive a good deal of support from the local populations. If I take as an example of this, to show you some of the things that we now know, that we didn't know, I go to the country in Europe that had the largest Jewish population, and nearly all of these Jews are going to die. That, of course, is Poland. Now, in Poland, again, I have to be careful here. There's a Polish narrative and there's a Jewish narrative. The Polish narrative is, there's no Holocaust in Ireland. That you should know. The Polish narrative is, we know the Jews were murdered here. We know the Jews suffered. And we know even that they suffered more than we did. But we suffered too, and we did everything that we could to help the Jews survive. We were under the gun, but we did what we could. The Jewish narrative is, they're all a bunch of scum. They're all a bunch of paskunyaks. They're all a bunch of anti-Semites. They killed us, they were worse than the Germans. Neither narrative is correct. When I go to Poland, they think I'm a Polonophobe. When I talk to my Polish Jewish survivor friends, they think I'm an apologist for Poland. The fact of the matter is the truth is betwixt and between. Let me put it to you this way. Even my Holocaust survivor friends have to admit this. Any Jew who lived in German-occupied Poland and was not in a camp, was on the run or was hiding out, no Jew could have survived in German-occupied Poland unless he or she, somewhere along the line, was helped by sympathetic Poland. You couldn't survive. There had to be Poles who helped you, one way or another. Does it mean that Poles didn't kill Jews? They sure as hell did. Does it mean that Polish men did not exploit Jewish women and girls for sex? They sure as hell did do that too. And what rocked Poland to its very core, and continues to rock Poland, is the book Neighbors that came out by Jan Gross in the middle of the 1990s. Remember what the Polish narrative is? That is, we helped them all. We did what we could, but we were under the gun. Gross, not a Jew. Some Jewish background, but really not a Jew, not raised as a Jew. As a child, he travels, the family lived not far from the town of Jedwabne. What would have been Shteb? And there's a marker in Jedwabne. On July 14th, around that time of 1941, the Germans came into Jedwabne and they killed all the Jews in the town. His mother and father told him, it didn't exactly happen like that, but keep your mouth shut. Don't talk about it. Comes 1981, Solidarity, the door opens in Poland, he comes to the United States, becomes a distinguished professor of political science, first at NYU, and now is at Princeton. Goes back to Poland after the fall of communism and investigates what happened in Jedwabne. Well, what happened on July 14th of 1941 is that the Jews were murdered in Jedwabne. They were not murdered by the Germans. They were murdered by their Polish neighbors. They were thrown into the river. They were put into a barn and fire was set. People had their throats slashed. This is Poles murdering Jews. And further investigation would demonstrate that it happened a number of times. So the point here in all of this, were there Polish scum that did our people in? The answer is yes. There is no question about this. Don't walk out of here saying Professor Berk said Polish anti-Semitism didn't exist during the war. It did. But it's also true. There were thousands upon thousands of Poles that sheltered Jews, one way or another. And remember, German-occupied Poland is not like German-occupied France. If you shelter a Jew in Western Europe, you go to prison. If you shelter a Jew in German-occupied Poland, they kill you and your family and they take away your land. The Talmudic expression that never judge anyone unless you've stood in their shoes is a very good one. I tell my students, must shoot their shot. I tell them, if I were a Polish Catholic, living in Poland, I know what I would not do. I would not rape a Jewish woman or a Jewish girl. I would not turn over the Jews to the Germans. I would not exploit them financially. But I must tell, I'm telling you, as I tell them, and you think about this. If I were a Polish Catholic and a Jewish family came to me and said, you gotta shelter me. The Nazis are gonna kill me and my family. Given the penalties for sheltering Jews, I'm not so sure that I would have taken that Jewish family in. You think about that before condemning the Poles. There is no question. Some of the Polish underground people spend more time killing Jews than they did fighting the Germans. I am not exonerating the Poles. I am simply telling you, 70 years after the war, looking at the evidence that we have, it's not that, let's say, that solid belief that we had before, that all of the Poles collaborated with the Germans and that the Jews would have survived had they had more help from the Poles. More Jews would have survived had they had more help from the Poles. There's no question about that. But there were Poles that were lynched, that were hung by the Germans, and there were Poles that did save Jews. So, these are some of the things that we've learned. We don't have more time to go into the Roosevelt administration and the Catholic Church. If you want to raise questions, I will deal with this. When all is said and done, what do you learn from this? I don't have a monopoly on the truth. I'm not the prophet from upstate New York. But I will tell you this. One lesson is be very, very careful with any type of discrimination. It is a slippery slope. As Jews, we don't like to hear the words kike, maki, dirty Jew, and things like that. But there are other words that have no other place in our language too. Nigger, stick, block, kike, chink, chink, dyke. They have no words. These are words, they should be purged from our language. That's an important thing. The road to Auschwitz is paved by discrimination. And then I quote about, I wish he were my ancestor, it's the same last name, he spells it differently, B-U-R-K-E. You studied had a good course in English history, you know about Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, incidentally, is one of the few Englishmen in Parliament that supports the American claim in 1776 for independence. And what does Burke say in that famous statement? The only thing for evil to triumph is that good men do not. You understand what that means? It is necessary. It's not enough. This I tell the students, it's not enough to be in a conversation when people make derogatory remarks about gender or about race or about religion. It's not enough to turn away. You got to combat. It is necessary. You must combat evil. This is a form of evil, and it must be combated. And a third lesson. I also teach the history of the Second World War. And then as I told you, I teach the Holocaust. You realize how we cheapen the words hero, heroine, and heroism. A great athlete is a hero. A great entertainer is a heroine. That's not true. They deserve what they get. I always often have fights with my wife about this. She thinks they get too much money. I say they deserve it. They've worked hard all their lives. If they're an athlete, the times of work can be very short. And besides, they bring in money. In a capitalist society, if you bring in money, a lot of money, deserve a lot of money. But they're not heroes, they're not heroines, and that's not heroism. You know what a hero is? You know it, some of you better than I do. You're in Higgins vote. This is the 7th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa, the worst battle in the Pacific. Or you go back to June 6, 1944. The Higgins votes are the votes that take the soldiers and the Marines to the shore. You see the German or Japanese bullets skimming across the water. You see the artillery bouncing in the water. You see some of the other Higgins boats being blown up. And then the sergeant, the naval officer says, 30 seconds. And the rank goes down. You charge into that fire. That's hero. That's a hero. These are real heroes. The other stuff, the entertainers and the sports, that's Mickey Mouse stuff. Or you're a Gentile, wherever you are in German-occupied Europe. And a Jew comes to you and says, will you shelter me? And you take that Jew in. That's heroism. That's real heroism. And then maybe some of you are here. I'm not pandering to you. Holocaust survivors experience things that no human being should ever see. No human being should ever experience. Rape, mutilation, the killing of families. And most of them, not all of them, not every Holocaust survivor is a success story. The mental institutions are filled with them, both in Israel and in the United States. You can't go through this without being scarred. And yet, for most of them, not all, but for most of them, they are prepared to spit in the face of history. They've lost everything. They build new lives. They build new families. They become contributing citizens to the countries in which they are. Those are heroes. Those are heroes. And so I say to you, there are many lessons. I don't have a monopoly on the truth. There are many lessons that you can learn from the Holocaust. I suggested most of the class in the Holocaust composed of Christian students. I say to them as well as to the Jewish students, study the Holocaust well, and just maybe the 21st century can be the best century in the history of humanity. Thank you very much. Shabbat shalom. I won't spin out, and you shouldn't spin out the questions. Are there any questions?
You have to go through Catholic.
Are there any questions at all on the material that I covered? Yes?
Now we have the
Well, he's raising the question, we have Palestinian or Arab invocation of some ferocious ideas about the Jews. What should be our country's connection with this? How do we deal with this? Well, the State Department claims that it looks very carefully at Palestinian textbooks and it brings pressure upon the Palestinian government. But implicit in what you're saying is we have a real problem, or the Israelis have a real problem. You cannot indoctrinate people for an extended period of time with all sorts of ideas of hate and then expect them to sit down and make peace. It is a very, very difficult issue. It is something that Israel and more moderate Palestinian leaders will have to wrestle with. Yes?
What was the reaction of the Catholic Church in Chernobyl at the end of World War II when they realized the scope of the Holocaust?
All right, what's the reaction of the Catholic Church at the end of World War II, it will not be until years later that the Catholic Church will begin to talk about, in an honest way, about, let us say, the role that it played in the Holocaust. And that, of course, centers on Pope Pius XII. This is a very tricky and lengthy business, but let me tell you this, without getting into the specific details. From 1939 to 1945, when Pius XII was the head of the Catholic Church, not once, not in a single Easter speech, Easter Sunday speech, or a Christmas Day speech, did Pope Pius XII ever condemn Nazi anti-Semitism, never speak about what was happening to the Jews, and never called upon Catholics and other Christians in Europe to come to the defense of Jews. That's what you level against it. On the other hand, and I deal with this when I talk to the students, there's a transcendental issue here that you have to be careful about. How do you resist evil when there's a price to pay for evil? Any guy, I tell the students, you didn't like President Bush, you don't like President Obama, you set up a table in the College Center at Union, and you get a petition and you send it to the president. Will your grades suffer? Will you be thrown out of school? The answer, of course, is no. How do you oppose evil when there's a price to pay for it? That's not an easy question to answer. And that's the question that the Pope has to face. If I speak out against the Nazis, will Hitler and the Nazis take it out against the Catholic Church? Will Catholics suffer as a consequence of this? I'm giving you explanation. I'm not giving you exoneration. If you are a Catholic, the Pope is the vicar of Christ on this planet. That is, the Pope is Christ, Jesus' representative on this planet. And if you are a Catholic, according to the doctrine of papal infallibility, if the Pope speaks ex cathedra, that is from the chair, on matters of faith and morals, he is infallible. Is not the murder of millions of innocent men, women, and children? Isn't this a moral issue? Doesn't the Pope have the right to speak out? Isn't it imperative for him to speak out? I'm saying to you, you have to look. The historian always has to look at different sides. There's never one side. There's always another side. It doesn't mean that the other side is correct. But as a historian, I must tell you, you've got to look at the other side. Nonetheless, I come down on the idea that, in fact, the Pope should have spoken out. The other question, what about the bombing of the camps? Why didn't we bomb the railroad lines and the crematoria and the gas chambers? I tell you, you speak to Jews of a certain age, this is the great failure of the Roosevelt administration. It's not. The great failure of the Roosevelt administration is not to open the gates to Jewish immigrants. But there is no question, we do not bomb. Well, why don't we bomb? Is it an issue of anti-Semitism? The answer is yes. Just for some people, particularly in Great Britain, in the capital, not Churchill, but there are people who are anti-Semitic. They don't give a damn about the Jews. But there's another issue. An issue that is as relevant today as it was during the Holocaust. Listen to my statement, or the question. Can you justify the loss of men and materiel for humanitarian purposes? Had we bombed the railroad lines and the gas chambers and the crematoria, it would not have shortened the war by a single moment, not by a single minute. And for those of you that are familiar with the war, you send up 100 B-17s on what during the war was called a milk run, an easy run, where the German opposition was not great. You send up 100 B-17s, you can bet your last buck 100 B-17s are not coming home. A few will be shot down by German aircraft. A few will be shot down by anti-aircraft fire. A few will run out of fuel. A few will get into accidents. So even if you lose just 10 planes, can you justify the loss of men and materiel for humanitarian purposes? And how does it play out in our time? It is one of these ironies of history. And I think I told you last night, for those who were there, I come from the Golden Land, from Brooklyn. So I'm a congenital Democrat for the most part. But you know what? Probably the greatest example of genocide that took place was in Rwanda. We could have stopped that slaughter in Rwanda. It's on Bill Clinton's watch. Bill Clinton is the man that some black people said was the first black president. Really the first, because of the sympathy for black people and the closeness he had with a number of black leaders. And yet, we don't lift a finger. And you know why we don't lift a finger? He's not anti-black, of course. It's Black Hawk Down. Remember? Seems like 1,000,000 years ago. The American helicopter shot down 23 dead Marines in Somalia, right? He's not going to get American soldiers involved in Rwanda. You take 5,000 American soldiers, 5,000 British soldiers, 5,000 French soldiers, 5,000 Belgian soldiers, and you stop the slaughter in Rwanda. We're not willing to do it. How do you resist evil when there's a price to pay for it? That's the issue. It's always the issue. This is not to justify this. We should have intervened in Rwanda. That's what a great country does. That's what a country that proclaims that its code is at the basis of humanitarianism. That's what you got to do. But we didn't do it. Yeah.
If there was against the race of Jews, now ISIS are religiously are doing the same thing.
Yes.
That Hitler did, but for different reasons. What would be the response of the war?
He's making the analogy with ISIS. ISIS is a murderous organization. Let me tell you something. You don't destroy ISIS by bombing. You got to go in. Or to use the euphemism, you got to put boots on the ground. Now you may argue, ISIS is a terrible organization, but it's not a threat to the American national interest. So that's why you don't put the boots on the ground. But you have to understand, the rapes of the Yazidi women, the rapes and the mutilation and the killing of people goes on. It may not be in the American interest to defend ISIS, or excuse me, to destroy ISIS. But if you allow ISIS to continue, then you're really letting lots of people die. Is this? This is a group of dedicated people in ISIS, but they wouldn't stand a chance against a well-trained army. So once again, 5,000 American soldiers, 5,000 British soldiers, 5,000 French soldiers, 5,000 Belgian, Italian, and Dutch soldiers. You put them in there, and ISIS is gone in 2 weeks. ISIS is gone. But you got to be prepared to pay the price, and nobody's prepared to pay that price. Fine. One last one. I know we're running late, but I don't want to.
I want to emphasize the story that you told about the Polish bus driver stopping the bus when you told them that Christ was Jewish. This has happened actually right here in Detroit, not for the Polish bus driver. It was about 20 years ago when the entire Council of France was speaking, I believe, for a meeting of the American Jewish Committee. And he said that he went through the entire preparation for the diplomatic career through the highest French school, and he was 19 years old when the first time in his life he heard that Christ was Jewish. And he had never heard such a thing, and he punched the person who told him that. And that's the highest training that French diplomats were getting in this century.
I want to interject here and thank you, Professor Berk, for an amazing Shabbos.
Thank you
very much. And I was thinking, as Professor spoke beautifully this afternoon about the Holocaust and some of the lessons thereof. And for me as a rabbi, every time I come to shul, every time we come to shul, we're fighting against Hitler. Every time we do anything Jewish, we're standing up against the Nazis. And just was reminded of that, Professor Berk, with you here and speaking about it. And even more on top of that, we don't just come to shul because we continue to defeat the Nazis and we continue to fight against Hitler, but because this is the place where we need to have those moral conversations, where we have to challenge each other and really asking ourselves, what does God want of us in this world? And I think you helped us ask some of those questions, and please God, we should continue those conversations when we begin for this Shabbat. So thank you very much, Professor Berk. I want to thank the Beverly Morris Baker Foundation and Beverly Morris Baker for sponsoring this wonderful Shabbat learning opportunity. I want to thank Karen and Larry Katz for sponsoring it, Toby Bella for all of her hard work, and Shira Shapiro and her staff for everything they do. Thank you all for being here and engaging in this amazing learning opportunity. We are grateful, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.